Welcome to Module 3. In this module, we're going to look at teenage troubles. This is part of a textbook, and this is the start of a more Canadian focus. I recognize that the first part of the chapter kind of covers some of the ground we've been dealing with in the first module, second module, but it does move into a much more Canadian perspective. We're going to look at Tanner's definition. Tanner's gang definition, in considering gangs, talks about the fact that there's considerable disagreement between academics. Now, this is a point that I keep making with you because I think in British Columbia, this is very true when we listen to some of the academics speak about the problems that we have in our communities around gangs. Tanner's concerned that legitimate informal youth groups could wrongfully be classified as a gang. He's concerned, obviously, that if we have poor definitions that researchers use to conduct their research, we could have underrepresentation of gangs, and we could also have overrepresentation. For Tanner, he considers ownership of a name. A gang, to be a gang, has to have a name. If we look at some of our gangs, some of them are this guy's group or that guy's group, but they don't have necessarily a gang name. Wearing of colors is an indicator of a gang, or other distinctive group symbols or defining insignia, jewelry, tattoos. For Tanner, control or claim of a control of an area is very important. That's either they do control it or they want to claim that they control it. There's communal criminal activity for these people. They are out there committing crimes. This is what differentiates them from Michael Chettleberg's Pee Wee hockey team. They have a communal criminal activity. There's organization of leaders and followers. And clearly, we don't have a gang of one. There's a number of members involved. Why do youth join gangs? Well, if anybody tells you that they have the absolute reason, be suspect. The research is speculative at best, and there's so many varieties of opinion on why youth join gangs. We have some common predictors, however. Social class. Lower working class, poorer families in poor neighborhoods have higher percentages of youth that join gangs. Family structure. There's a higher percentage of gang members that come from single family homes. Education performance and career aspirations. Lower educated are more likely to join gangs. Age. The average age of gang members is 17 to 18. Race and ethnicity plays a part. Racism and prejudice can cause people to join gangs, particularly if they perceive harassment from the police. So the earlier gangs, if you watch the movie Gangs of New York, clearly those gangs were of European descent. They strove against the social structure and the state, and also against those people of wealthier neighborhoods that had came in the earlier waves of new Americans. As we go through this, I want you to consider your own experiences in interacting with youth that you believe to be involved in gangs. Decker and Van Winkle's research says people join gangs for protection. They also join gangs to sell drugs, opportunity to make money, and in some cases, simply to defend their neighborhood. When we look in Vancouver, do we have neighborhoods where you think this is applicable? Do we have youth out defending their neighborhoods? I don't think so to a certain extent, but we do have some areas. I remember earlier in my career dealing with people from the Skeena Terrace, the Skeena Boys. When we look at Canada and gangs, we have considerably less research than other parts of the world. We have to look to these other parts of the world to give us a base in order to move forward in our exploration of gangs. There's very little academic gang research. There is no gang component on the UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting. And we've only had, in the last 8 years, our very first Canada survey on gangs. The definition that was used in the survey was a youth gang is defined as a group of youths or young adults in your jurisdiction under the age of 21 that you or other responsible persons in your agency or community are willing to identify and classify as a gang. This was a survey given to police officers, basically asking police officers hey, do you have a youth gang problem? From the 283 police agencies that reported in 2002, they found there was 484 youth gangs in Canada with just under 7,000 gang members. Remember, this study predominantly relies on interviews or surveys done of police officers. What we know from that survey is that most gang members are male in Canada. Most youth gang members are male. They're under the age of 18. There's a range of racial and ethnic groups that are involved in gangs in Canada. There's significant representation of African Canadian, Caucasians, and First Nations. What's very interesting for us is that our gangs, over 44% of them, police believed collaborate with adult crime groups. The next study we're going to consider is done by our own Simon Fraser University professor Robert Gordon. He studied incarcerated, self-identified Vancouver gang members. He found that 68% of them were Canadian-born. They explained their gang involvement as an aspiration for material goods. They wanted nicer cars. They wanted nicer clothes, expensive sound systems. This was done by Professor Gordon on incarcerated youth, people who had been convicted of crime and serving a sentence at Wellington. What's noteworthy of Gordon's study is there's no discussion of protection. There's no discussion about defending their neighborhood. I think this is a critical component that we need to focus on as police officers in our examination and our discussions with the public about our gang situation here in British Columbia. These are not youth defending their part of the world. This is not ghetto gangs. These are youth that are involved in crime, involved in gangs for material benefit. Another study conducted in Montreal by LeBlanc and Langtot found that gang members were more involved in delinquent behavior than other members. They had poor relationships with their parents. They had weaker attachments to schools. They engaged in more unsupervised routine activities. And they had lower levels of self-control. The next study we're going to look at is a study that was done in Toronto. This is important for our research. Canadian-born students were more likely to report gang involvement. However, the longer an immigrant youth lived in Canada, the more likely they were to join a gang. This clearly indicates from their research, the research of Gordon, that we cannot look to changes in immigration policy to find a way out of this problem. A lot of the youth that are involved in gangs in our country were born here in Canada. What the Toronto study found was that 41% of the gangsters were black youth, with 37% white youth. Most gangs were not racially homogeneous. That means that they mixed together. They were not divided along racial or ethnic divides. 60% of the gangs they looked at claimed, in fact, to be a mixed race gang. 11 to 13 gang members were roughly in a gang. And clearly in Toronto, they did see that these youth gangs claimed a specific geographical area for control. In Toronto, they also found that gang members were involved in the drug trade, thefts, robberies. But interestingly, violence in Toronto occurred between rival gang members and rarely with non-gang members. I think that's another critical point for us as police officers as we educate the public. Carrying of weapons was imperative for these youth, particularly in their neighborhoods. However, while they had access to firearms, generally speaking, it was knives, baseball bats, and crowbars were the weapons of choice. As we conclude this module, it's clear that the research in Canada needs some more development. But the importance or learning objective for us is that we cannot look to the United States and their gang problem and compare it to ours and think we're going to find solutions. We have a much different phenomenon that we're dealing with here. So as we conclude Module 3, the learning objective clearly is that our youth gang, our gang situation here is different than it is in the United States. We must find our own solutions, and we must recognize that the problems that we have with gangs in Canada are born here in Canada. Thank you very much.